This is not your average bar mitzvah. I mean, I know I look like I'm a 13-year-old. Trust me when I say that my journey to this moment, much like Joseph in this week's Parsha, has been anything but average. My Torah portion is called Vayeshev, and it's one of the last stories in the entire book of Genesis. Genesis is an origin story. It explains where we came from and how we got here. And while there's lots in the book that's warm and funny, overall it's actually kind of terrible. Right? And Adam and Eve, exiled from the garden. Their son Cain kills his brother. God literally wipes out the entire earth in a flood a couple generations later. This is supposed to be our origin story, and it is full of lying, of violence, and even murder. It's as if there are cycles of violence reverberating in the family tree throughout the whole book of Genesis. But maybe it doesn't have to be understood that way. Today, I want to argue that the Torah is teaching us a path towards something better in this week's Parsha. I want to use Vayeshev as a blueprint for how to interrupt cycles of violence. So first, we'll explore how an unsung hero can teach us how to interrupt those cycles through compassion. Next, we'll learn from Joseph how faith can guide us towards a path of healing. Until finally, I'll talk a little bit about what this means for me personally. So first, one of the first things that we learn in my Torah portion is that Jacob openly loved Joseph more than other sons. And if you know nothing else about Joseph, you probably already know about his special Technicolor Dreamcoat that Jacob gave him. And you probably already know that it's generally not a great parenting strategy to love one kid more than the others. But maybe something you don't know is that this is not the first time in Genesis that we have seen a betrayal of children and siblings play out in this family tree. And we can hear it echoing even louder if we pay attention to the Hebrew word shalach. It means to send out. And it shows up in my portion in a fascinating way. So earlier in Genesis, Abraham shalach his son Ishmael out. And then he shalach his arm to kill, or maybe to kill, his son Isaac. In my parsha, his grandson Jacob shalach his great-grandson Joseph to go on a dangerous journey to find his brothers. And when he finds them, the brothers shalach him into a pit. And then later, they dip his special coat in blood and they shalach it back to their father when they try to convince him he was eaten by a wild animal. In the Jewish tradition, every word in Torah matters. Nothing is redundant. The text is going out of its way here, using the same exact word to make it clear that Joseph's brothers were not the first ones in the book of Genesis to betray and to hurt their relatives, but they would be the last. And here's where I come to my first contention. Hidden in the Hebrew of this week's Parsha is an unsung hero who also hears these echoes of shalachim in violent ways, but he chooses to interrupt it. It's Reuben, Joseph's oldest brother, the one who, by all accounts, should be angriest. Reuben first tries to tell them, Lo nakenu nafesh, let's not take away his life, but they don't respond. So he speaks to them in a different way. He uses a word that is resonating in their DNA, a word that echoes the cycles of violence in their family, but this time, he uses that word with compassion. He tells his brothers, Hashlichu. Did you hear the word shalach? Mm-hmm. Hashlichu oto al habor. Send him into the pit. V'yad el tishlachu. There it is again. Bo. And do not send out your hand against him. The narrator tells us that his intent was to come back later to rescue Joseph, which of course he never got to do because he was pulled out of the pit and sold into slavery. Reuben must have known about the cycle of shalaching family members in violent ways, but he chose to not perpetuate that cycle on his brother. Maybe he was destined to shalach, but he found a way to shalach with compassion instead of violence. So in this way, Reuben teaches us one pathway to interrupt cycles of violence, to actively practice compassion and empathy. Let's explore how Joseph teaches us another. So, Joseph, his father loves him more than all his sons. But you know who doesn't seem to give him any attention? Somebody who spoke to his dad, who spoke to his grandpa, who spoke to his great-grandpa, but who never speaks to him. It's God. Maybe you can relate to that. Have you ever read the stories of the Bible
where God works all these miracles for people who are barren, people who are oppressed, people who are hungry, and you're like, hello? Where are those miracles right now? It's easy to look at the world around us and say, there is no way that an all-powerful God would let these awful things happen. And these are doubts that Joseph must have had too, especially after what happens to him in this parsha. Joseph must have heard the family history about how God asked his great-grandfather Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, and how Abraham replied, Hineni, meaning, I'm here, I'm ready. But at the last minute, an angel of God intervenes and saves Isaac. So, when Joseph's own dad says to him, go check on your brothers, the ones who hate you. The ones who are in all places Shechem, that place where your sister was violated, that place where your brothers massacred the entire city in retaliation. Joseph must have known he was being asked to do something dangerous. But he said, Hineni, I'm ready. Because you know how the story ends. Someone above you tells you to go on this dangerous journey, you say Hineni, and boom, you're saved at last possible. But of course, that's not what happens to Joseph. No angel of God steps in to save him. And in fact, according to Rashi, an angel of God stepped in to put him into more danger. Because when Jacob sends Joseph to Shechem, his brothers aren't there. And instead he finds this man wandering around who tells him his brothers have gone from here. Rashi says this wanderer is actually the angel Gabriel. And that when he says his brothers have gone from here, he means they've gone from brotherhood. So instead of saving Joseph from his estranged brothers, Gabriel tells Joseph where to go find them. Had he not encountered this angel, he would have just gone back home and said, Dad, sorry, they went in Shechem, I didn't find them. Instead, he ends up stripped of his special coat, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, far away from his father who loved him so much. So if you're Joseph at this time, how do you feel? God, what happened? This is what's supposed to happen. I said Hineni, you sent me on a journey. Why am I in a pit? What about this special connection that we had with our family? Where were you when they threw me into the pit? Where were you when they sold me into slavery? So surely, we would have understood if Joseph at this point said, I'm through. That's it, I'm abandoning the so-called God of my fathers, the God who never once spoke to me. But that's not what happens. In fact, the first words we hear Joseph say after he's sold into slavery happens in Egypt when he's refusing Potiphar's wife, and he says, how could I do this wicked thing and sin before God? First thing he says after being sold into slavery. And later, when things get worse for him and he's thrown into prison, he goes out of his way to demonstrate his piety. When his fellow prisoners say to him, they have these troubling dreams, he says, surely God can interpret your dreams. Joseph is teaching us our second lesson today in the Parsha in interrupting cycles of violence. To lean into our faith in God, even when it seems hardest to do just that. And that brings me to my final area of analysis. What this Parsha means to me personally. I want to talk about a time in my life when it seemed hardest to lean into my faith. But first, let me give you a little context. I've always been pretty religious. In first grade, I started a holy club. Where we would have make-believe mass in the schoolyard during recess. Not exaggerating. That is what 6-year-old me was like. 8-year-old me was collecting saint cards the way my brothers were collecting Pokemon cards. 12-year-old me was given special permission by my pastor to become my little sister's godmother. If this B-Mitzvah happened when I was 13, a couple of things would be different. For one thing, I'd be really Catholic, which might throw a wrench into the works. Additionally, I would be straight, I would be female, I would be not yet obsessed with speech and debate, and maybe most importantly, I would still be able to see the Twin Towers from Metropolitan Avenue. As most of you in this room know, and some of you quite personally since you were there too, I watched the Twin Towers fall from 3 blocks away during my junior year of high school. Friends of mine pointed out the window when people started jumping. My dad and I watched the second tower fall while we were evacuating. I remember in the days that followed being angry at God for not existing. But I needed God the most. I wasn't leaning into my faith. But in the years that followed, I I missed being pretty religious. I tried going back to church, but I needed something different. I needed a community that had room for both my queerness and also for the part of me that looks for blue lights over the skyline in late August and that has heavy boots at 8:46 in the morning. I am proud of where I come from, but I needed something that made space for my whole self, including my queerness and including my trauma, and I found it in Judaism. A community that still prays in the direction of a temple that was destroyed 2,000 years ago and asks God every Shabbat to rebuild its walls. A tradition that teaches us how to hold trauma without perpetuating it on others, as we see Joseph and Reuben teaching us today. When I first started coaching speech and debate 12 years ago, I posted a saying in my classroom wall: speak up, change the world. When I started teaching at Yachad this year, I posted it in Hebrew, and I was stunned when I learned that in Hebrew, the phrase change the world, tishna'u, is literally one dot away from the phrase hate the world, tisna'u. And how true that feels in light of this parsha. When we speak up, like when Joseph's brother spoke up, we have a choice. We can raise our voices in the service of spreading hate, like most of Joseph's brothers did. Or we can raise our voices in the service of spreading change, like Reuben. Instead of sending out or shalaching hatred and fear, can we shalach compassion and mercy? Instead of shalaching despair in difficult times, can we shalach a recommitment to strengthen our faith when we need it the most? Reuben and Joseph, like all of us, have experienced betrayal, pain, and trauma in our lives. And their forefathers offered the only examples of speaking up in ways that perpetuated that pain. But today, their story gives us an example of speaking up in ways that lead to change. A change of status quo, a change of heart, a change that can interrupt cycles of violence. Joseph and Reuben show us that it can be done. May we find the strength today and always to follow their lead. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yesh koach.